First of all, I'm Paul. I obviously in the industry for 20 plus years. I love everything that is training and also about the impact of learning. What we're going to do today is also using Zoom. So we're pretty put some polls together. If you want to use the chat facility, then we'll pick that up. If you've got any questions throughout, we'll monitor that, then hopefully interject and you can bring your question to life. But for me today, obviously the topic is very much obviously about blended templates, the transition from classroom to the blended approach, and probably everything else in between as well, because we know that it's a journey. But I really want to take the opportunity to engage with as much as people as possible in this participation event. Before that, though, I would like to introduce the sponsor for today. Jan, could I hand the mic to yourself, please?
Well, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for the mic in this case. With regards to us sponsoring, what are we going to do? I'm going to share a few slides just to visualize what we're talking about. Don't worry, this is not a death by PowerPoint scenario. I certainly hope. Just explaining what Emissio does. Emissio as a brand, Emissio is Latin for blended. So I think we're in the right room. What we do is we make more training impact. And the way we do that is by, for training companies, is to look at the capability or quality side and the capacity or the quantity side. Helping training providers create more qualitative training, quite often blended learning, not always. That really means the design, the creation, the delivery of that. And the capacity side is really, how do you get more learners? How can you scale your training business? So we do elements of that, for example, workshops on business modeling, launching new products. You can see some of the titles there. What that means, what we do, learning platforms, training tools, but also on the content side, bespoke content or content libraries. We have about 4,000 courses that training providers can use to complement or augment their training courses themselves. We do a number of services around that, that either is to implement or to launch and scale, as we mentioned earlier. And you see next to that, the research and the community side. And that's really an important part on this as well, because we like an evidence-based approach. So we sponsor research, for example, with the University of Oxford. We work together to do research on blended learning adoption within the UK, within the training providers. We also collect case studies and stories from other customers, for example, and training providers in the market. And then we share that. For example, this case study that you see some graphs on the right-hand side, we shared that as a case study and we received an award for that together with our customer Frontline. That was an award for blended learning last year with the Learning Technologies Awards. But more importantly, all this knowledge, data, information, we then like to share. And we do that in, for example, this format, where within the webinars, the Blended Stories, we do this every month, share with the community what people have learned, invite experts in the room to do that. We also do events. Future Proof Your Training Business is an event. And we also have a conference, which will be in October again this year. You'll learn more about that later on in the year on how to make impact. Perfect. So that's very quickly about us, our principles. We think that training is a people business and the technology side is there to scale, add consistency, personalization. That's how you can use that. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Jan. So your very point there, training is about people, and very much this session is about the people today and our guest speakers. So what I would like to do is obviously introduce Marie-Louise. And Marie, perhaps in your introduction to your years of experience, perhaps it would be good if you could perhaps perhaps give an example, perhaps, of your experiences and perhaps the the significance, perhaps, of blends, obviously how that improved like operational efficiencies, perhaps, and what sort of strategies you had in that to perhaps tell that picture and tell that story today. So and thank you very much for joining us, I should say, as well. Let's get the critical thing is, let's be polite to everybody today and courteous. So Marie-Louise, over to yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Marie-Louise and I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm a digital learning expert, and I come from a media and marketing background. And I'm really happy to join on this blended learning. And I've obviously, Paul prepared me a little bit, so I started to think of examples in my daily practice. And I wanted to share with you an example of a blended learning program I developed. It's called Silver Starters, and it's for people over 50. Average age was 69, for people who have an idea to start their own business and don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea. And we teach them in this learning program throughout 12 weeks if it's a good idea or if it's not for them. So the target audience is people who are retired or unemployed, and at their older age, it's sometimes difficult to find a new job. But they have this idea how to start their own business. And we created a blend program of 20% offline activity. So there was a kickoff event and a final event. And in between was 60% of self-paced online learning. And the other 20% was coaching. And that was also peer coaching. We put them together in a team with other peers, but also like a business coach. So this was a perfect example of a blended program. And later on, I can share some insights on that, but maybe we should move on to the other expert to introduce.
well, John, I suppose that links very kindly to yourself, obviously, as that side as an expert there, John. And perhaps could you give a similar introduction to yourself, and perhaps use an example that you've had in your own experiences, around operational efficiencies or impact. Be good to understand a little bit about yourself as part of the introduction today.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, thank you for that, Paul. And in particular, Marie-Louise, thank you for the introduction as an expert. I shall wear that with pride around the office later on today. So my name's John Stuart. I am the co-founder of a company called Blend Training, which is obviously a very appropriate name for today's session. We set up about 5 years ago, essentially to explore and develop the benefits of technology towards providing blended learning. And turns out that was a great idea and brilliant timing, because COVID happened just at the same time as we were setting up a business delivering blended learning solutions. So it turns out that the first year of COVID was exceptionally busy talking to customers about how they take their classroom courses and do other things with it. That initial desire to exploit technologies and evolve the use of technologies and training to create more blended experiences has been just fantastic and fascinating since we started. We've done some really cool stuff over the last few years. That's been really interesting. We've also tried a few things that haven't worked quite so well, but I guess that's part of it as well. You're going to learn from your experiences. And increasingly, and I don't know if this is just because I'm really attached to, I guess, the use of technologies and learning and development, but there are so many tools appearing and out there, so many different approaches available for us to use. Half of our time nowadays is trying to, asking the questions like, is that good for what we want it to do, rather than can it do it? Because there's a huge variety of applications and softwares, but in actual fact, it all comes back to a much more traditional mindset around learning design, which is what do we want to do for our learners? What's the objective of our training? And getting that process right at the start, that's our learning design component, then feeds through the once we know what the learning design, once we know what the learners' experiences are going to look like, we build up learner journeys, and then you start to look for so what are the mechanisms, the media to get that information across, the most interesting ways to do that. And then we think about the applications, because hopefully by then you've got enough distinct and discriminatory questions to get the list of 200 applications down to 1 or 2 that you can actually use to get good content delivered out of that. I have got some examples of how we've done that. I've got, I think, an interesting one with Aldi a few years ago, where we took what was a very dry 3-day technical and legislatively driven course and created an entirely different blended learning experience. And within that, changed not only experience for the learners, but also from the training provision perspective. So that it was no longer trainers standing in a classroom 3 days at a time trying to deliver difficult content, but actually using the trainers in I guess a more efficient way, getting them to do the bits that they have to do, but also getting them to focus on the bits that they enjoy doing. So they got a lot out of it. So our trainers enjoyed the experience as well as the end users. So we'll maybe explore that a little bit, and it touches on that operational efficiencies point you said in my introduction, Paul. So we can come back onto that when you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've touched on some good points there, because also along this journey of exploration, in some respects, that you have the heart of it, you would perhaps may have a facilitated training, and it's where does that facilitator still sit in that journey, and it's still fundamentally important. But it's, as you said, it's getting the trainer to do the bits that they really enjoy, and perhaps some of the other introductory bits, the prerequisite of information. There's a way of using the right tools at that point, but then when you do get that opportunity to meet John, the expert, we can have more detailed sort of conversations about that to really bring it to life in that journey. And I suppose it's also knowing who your target audience is as well, from that perspective. And Jan, I don't know if that's perhaps an opportune time to perhaps look at who's in the room today in some respects, with a little poll that you've put together, I believe.
Oh, that's a very nice bridge there, Paul. Thank you very much. Yes, we have a question for our audience. Let's launch the poll. Hopefully everybody can see this. So the question is, in how far do you deliver already in a blended format? Is it all your courses? Most of them, only a few, maybe haven't started yet. Let's see what we have as answers. One of the research parts we did, I mentioned earlier, is with the University of Oxford. We've done this for 2 years to see what blended learning adoption is of training providers using blended learning throughout the country. And the first time we did it, so this is 2022, we found that actually maybe about 30%, 34% of training providers were using blended. And this significantly shot up in 2023. Actually, more than 50% of training providers said, we are already doing blended. We can all discuss and argue what blended really means here, but let's not go into that today. Just want to see, though, in how far people are using it. I'm going to end the poll now. We had everybody answer that, and I will share the results with you. So, as you can see, although people are doing a lot of blended, it's not for all the courses yet. Now, that could be for different reasons. People might say, well, not all my courses are actually relevant to do in a blended format, or I have particular different delivery methods. But most people here are saying for a few of our courses. So is there anybody in the room that would like to say something about that? Or Paul, do you have a particular question on that?
No, I think it's good to use another voice. So yeah, I'm more than happy to welcome people to bring some of their questions to life. Don't all be shy though. But if not, Lisa, could you perhaps bring that to life? My apologies.
Oh dear, I've got one of those faces, haven't I? I'm not surprised, to be honest, that 45% is, because I think as we're talking about COVID, we're still in that kind of, you know, frame where people are coming out of COVID, but still wanting to look to the future. And it doesn't really surprise me that 45%, you know, are still doing a bit blended, but a bit of something else, you know. Might get to a stage where one day we have all blended, but I think it's in its infancy maybe just now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you're quite right. And I think because our experts in the room, and we're all experts, but what I find as well is that when you're in that transitional mode, is sort of like, do you know what? You know, we talk about skills and the UK skills development and the deficit in the skills that we have in the UK workforce. But equally, there's such a valuable skill in that whole L&D function and that transition that sometimes I think gets ignored, and all you hear is the latest sort of tool that's come out there. Yeah, well, how I said that's a cycle, a life cycle in itself, where these new tools come onto the market space, and you know, with the generative AI and that sort of thing. That's great. And do you want to be on the crest of the curve, or do you want to think, actually, where is it most appropriate for that to be used? It's a tool, and where it is, the individuals, which is us, is the skill and how we apply that at the most appropriate time for an individual. So I just see that also Nicholas has put a question. Nicholas, did you want to bring that into the discussion as well?
Sure. Yeah, I'm interested in knowing how you can give trainees experience of using a system, and I'm talking here about the remote trainees, how you can train them, give them something valuable about a system which, since they're remote, they may not have access to directly.
Okay. Any of our experts got a viewpoint on that?
Yeah, I'm very fond of creating like small learning nuggets, also called micro learning, and disseminate these nuggets to the learners, maybe upfront in preparing them for the training or using a system. And you can make like a small screencast maybe and show how this system works, and then send it via WhatsApp or via email. And that often works very good also to engage the learner upfront before the training starts, to show them how the system looks. And it takes a little bit of the edges off on learning on the new application, working with a new application.
Okay, perfect. John, what about yourself?
I mean, I'd very much mirror what Marie-Louise has said. I think that we would use things like e-learning, like bite-sized e-learning modules, which means it's essentially short interactive video, but you would use that interactivity to give the learners the steps, the knowledge they need to be able to interact with that system that they don't yet have access to, which means you can train without them having direct access. You can take that further and give them full mirrors of the system if you want, so that you can actually have them interacting with it in a learning environment, not in a live environment. And equally, there is, dependent on the type of system, there are technologies that you can draw in to help. So for instance, anything that's a browser-based system, if you're trying to train on that, you can consider things like digital adoption technologies, which we've used hugely effectively recently with a global retailer. Digital adoption sits almost as a layer on top of the browser. So what you can do is you can train people directly in the system. So it's when you enter your information in this field, what we're looking for is X, Y, and Z. This is why you're putting it in here. And once you put it in here, you'll then go to this next. And you can lead them through the live system and hold their hand. And all of that kind of layers up into that sort of process. So there's ways you can even blend that approach. So
and also maybe at a kickoff, you can show the application and take them by hand. We've done that also, so that works quite well.
Tony, you've been interacting using icons. Tony, would you like to bring your question to the fore, please?
Yeah, the hands up is something I learned during COVID. I mean, just a few observations really, because prior to COVID, 100% of my stuff was done face to face, and it all fell off a cliff. And I tried to have conversations with clients before COVID, and it was very difficult to sell kind of remote stuff or blended stuff. But since then, it's become significantly easier, I think, to to sell a blended offering, because it's been a great and it's been a great opportunity to experiment with lots of different things. I think the key for me is you still need good training design. You can't replace good training design with gimmicks that do kind of really weird things. And I think as well that what I'm finding is a lot of my clients have been telling me this year that they want to start to bring back some face-to-face. It's kind of creeping back. And for me, blended doesn't mean 100% remote. Blended, means a number of different avenues. So I'm carrying on this blended approach even when I'm doing face-to-face as well. So I think it's just really interesting, because that's what Jan was saying about what do we mean by blended. I like to make sure that I've kind of met my participants online or in some way before I've actually physically met them to create this learning journey.
Yeah, and in most cases, it even starts on the promotion of the training, on the landing page. And I'm a big believer of branding the whole journey, like starting on the landing page and finishing up with a follow-up, which everything is in good branding and consistency and terminology. And yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I also look at with Inside Blended there, Tony, as well, is that just because the technology is there, the critical thing is never to lose your identity in your training, and that personalization and that differential as well. Because, as we say, we talked about tools, but really, if you're in that transitional mode, people come to you because they know you. They know the quality of your training, and it's then how do you then productize the Tonys of this world so they still see you as part of that journey inside your training delivery. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm just conscious of really trying to get some more questions going and everything like that. So if it's okay with everybody else, we'll move on. Just some other ideas I've been thinking about in this session. And one of those is also, I think, Tony, you talked about it, is obviously the impact as well. And I'll be interested to learn from both our guests here today, as some of the sort of, I don't know, the methodologies that you've used or you would recommend, should we say, in measuring that learner impact, on any specifics around that, to gauge that success. So I'd be interested to learn that. Marie-Louise, if I could go to you again, if you don't mind.
Yes. I have very good experience with learning more about the learner. So doing like a personal intake, that could be via a survey, but learning more on their learning goals, on what their level of knowledge is, what their experience is. So if you as a trainer know more about the learner upfront, then you can use that information in either adaptive learning paths or personalize your learning, or in coaching elements and training elements, really focus on this, giving this personalized experience for learners. And also maybe you can group them together if people have like the same level of knowledge, or they geographically wanted to meet up with each other. So that could really work. Knowing more about the learner, the target audience.
Yeah. And I think also, I was just reading some of the text in the chat there, but also it's about knowing your target audience, isn't it, as well? I mean, obviously you made a very good point about the demographics, which could be more senior in life. You have different respects, because the difference between education when you're going through the college, the universities there, that when you go into the world of training is, well, why am I doing it? What's the purpose of me doing it as well? Is really different, and that's how you then we have to change in some respects how we look at the actual delivery. John, same question to yourself in some respects as well. From a perspective of different strategies you apply, perhaps to understand, the individual, the learner, and how you can perhaps maximize that as well.
I think I very much mirror what Marie-Louise has said around that sort of learner component and understanding the learners. I think that's a key part in the early stages when you're looking at a piece of learning design, or like the creation of a new journey. You mentioned the word methodology at the start as well, and this is a really traditional approach, and it's not a hugely complex methodology, but the ADDIE methodology, which I'm pretty sure everyone in our virtual room will be aware of, But we still, we've kind of evolved our version of that that we apply. But essentially, that still stands. It's that initial analysis up front, the A of the ADDIE, where you examine what you've got in front of you, and that includes that learners. Who is your audience? What do they need? Match that with the customer's objectives for the training. What is it you want to get out of this? What is the outcomes that you're hoping? And our challenge, I think, from a learning design point of view, is to marry all that up to come out with a learning program that will deliver both the client objectives and the learners' outcomes, so they get the impact they want. And it's really easy to brush over that in a sentence or two. It's much harder to do that in reality. But the more you understand those learners, the more you understand how they learn, what they'll interact with, their demographics, their profile, from experience, what's worked with them can be really valuable. I think that's where, certainly with clients where they've got data in their LMS, if they're using a NewSpring, and you can look at what have people done and what's been successful and what's not, you can incorporate all that knowledge into that training design. So when you build your program with that in mind. And I just want to kind of like circle that in. Something Tony said earlier about incorporating the facilitator-led component into training. I absolutely think that's a component of that's a tool within that sort of blended training delivery toolbox. I don't think you can do full programs, certainly when you get to academy level outcomes. You can't be doing that without facilitators. You need people with knowledge that can interact where that's needed. And there are times where that just cannot be automated. It cannot be done using other media or other mechanisms. That you need people talking about these things. And there's a whole host of ways to do that, whether that's virtual sessions, classroom sessions, face-to-face, or how you look at community forums, building like learner groups, cohorts that you can work with. All of that works. So there's a whole host of opportunities to draw that in. But I do think that that a lot of it comes from that initial stages that you got to learn about those learners and the requirements, and that'll feed into the design stage that you can design with that in mind. From experience, it's not uncommon when you're talking to training providers where they'll present you with your off-the-shelf package that you've developed over time, you're delivering it, and you've had good feedback. And there is nothing wrong with that. I think the challenge for us as training providers is to look at it and go, is that the best way for us to have the impact that we say we're having? Because as time marches on, there might be mechanisms that will do either parts of that better or, total overhaul if that's needed. But equally, it doesn't mean that that's not the best way to do it either, because there are some things that you just need to have people in front of you to do that. And I think it's still the case. It's as much true now as it was before.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a couple of points there. You talked about the ADDIE process in some respects. Now, I've used ADDIE throughout my career as well, even when I'm doing, should we say, putting a tender together with an organization, we would actually take them through the ADDIE process. And what I have noticed sometimes, it's old, but it's robust. But people say, but there are new ways of doing things. I said, but equally, you find that those new ways have actually been built on the foundation of ADDIE. And then what you can do, you just add in informal feedback or formative feedback as part of that process, that takes that on to the next level. One other, I'd be interested to understand, obviously from a design perspective, other sort of principles or innovation approaches basically in that whole design mode at all. John, I see you've still got the mic here in some respects. What other principles have you used? I mean, if I just caveat that a little bit, most recently Donald Taylor put his global sentiment surveys out. So we've got a new trends that's coming through, and obviously number one is obviously generative AI, but all the things around blended still for years and years have been in the top 10. So I'm going to park that bit. But what I'd be really interested in is some of those other other processes you use in the design world to ensure that you still deliver that impact for the learner.
I mean, I think that's as much about an organizational approach or a personal discipline as it is about like a formal process. I think that, I referred to ADDIE as a methodology. I guess it's a framework. So you go through that, sequence, which makes sense. But as to how you do that when you're working through the design process, that is about the disciplines that you apply to that. You'll come up very early in the process with what are the learning objectives going to be. You've defined your audience, you define your learning objectives, and then you're going to then use that to create your content, whatever format it's going to come out. And I think that you create that whole framework, and you do that. You go through that process. Your learning objectives. You look at the content that you're going to transfer to learners. You're going to break that up into subject areas or modules, topics, however you do that sort of like that functional build, and you start to create that structure. And it's at that stage that you've now got to view the structure. You should be asking yourself, right, how am I going to get that sort of information into my learners' heads in the best way? And that's your discipline. It's you that ask that question, and you should continually come back to that, because that's you thinking about learning objectives and ensuring that design process loops back to the learners constantly. And I do this with my team so often, where they come back with some beautiful looking structures and designs for a training program, but they often will lose sight of what the basic learning objectives were at the start. Spend a lot of time getting those learning objectives as punchy and as clear as possible. Yeah. There's a reason for that, is because you can hang everything on it, and you should keep asking the question, does it do that? Because if it doesn't, you've probably gone down the wrong route. And it's easy to get drawn into there are so many technologies that can help us do this, and we can look at new video applications or whatever that might be. It's like that's not the right sort of question to be asking as a team. The question you're asking your team is what is it we're trying to achieve? What's the learner getting out of it? And then the question is, which tool gives that? That also makes finding the tools best. And it might be, it's not a tool, it might just be that it's we can do that with a simple question and answer. It could be done while we do it in a collaborative way. We could do it in a forum, you could do it with a trainer, it could be a part of a web session. It doesn't really matter. That answer should be quite eeasy to come to if you're still focusing on the learning objectives. So I think it's disciplines, that's certainly the way we approach that. Keep that in mind and keep coming back to the learners and that learner outcome. That way you'll get a program designed for them.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting point. And I'm just looking at Tony's comments as well, Marie-Louise, in the context that what John was just describing there. Where do you see also, when you're in your design mode, perhaps how that you can, we're talking about the learner impact and everything like that, but what about the facilitator? Have you been able to perhaps create a program of work that, from a blended point of view, but also how you can use those similar sort of messaging, but perhaps for the facilitator as well, to look at standardized approaches?
I agree with John, and to add something else, I would always keep in mind that it's not only sending the information, but also get the learner be active. So I could maybe develop a program, design a program with 50% sending and 50% in activities where the learner should be active, whether that's experimenting, whether that's sharing their own knowledge, sharing their own experience, whether that's building a prototype, but do something active. And so it's in the facilitator, that's really facilitating the learner to be active in the program and not only send the information. So there could be all types of activities, from discussion boards to, like I said, building a prototype. And in sending information, I nowadays often develop video and then short form video, a lot of video, because it's in self-paced learning for learners, also encourage them maybe to watch it on double speed, so they can go really fast to learners. I see my own kids and young people do that, watch videos. But also maybe you can add role models in the videos, especially in the workplace. This works really well. And like I saw Lisa mentioning how to get for all the learners. All the learners like to see also their role models or connect with peers, also to boost their confidence in learning new digital strategies. or maybe team them up with a youngster who knows the digital technology really good and has to explain it to the older people. So
in a context of a template, then, so what would you prescribe from a template perspective? Because obviously what I always look at is the scope of work, the relevancy, and switching backwards and forwards, obviously with the feedback or anything like that. If I was actually saying, Marie-Louise, I'm looking for a template, they always say, what does good look like? That's always one of the golden tickets. If only, and it's really dependent on the market, the conditions, and the problem that you're trying to solve. But if I try to ask you, perhaps in the context of a template, because you want to sort of standardize your approaches, so people know what to expect and what tools to be used in that.
Yeah, I pay a lot of attention to, like I said, on the even before the learning journey on the landing page. So the learning goals, the learning objectives are placed on the landing page. What to expect of this training, and I also incorporate them in an introduction. I pay a lot of attention to the introduction of the training. So what are the learning goals? What is your experience as a learner? Get to know the trainer, get to know the facilitator, get to know each other. So and then comes the learning content. And the learning content really in different modules and activities, but also closing the training and do the follow-up. Maybe few weeks later or a few months later, so really connect the whole learning journey and not only the training itself.
Okay, brilliant stuff. And what we can do after this, we got a slide to talk about templates in a little bit more granular detail. So I saw Nigel made a couple of comments in there as well. We'd like to address that because this is really about the experts in the room. So we've also got template information that we can share, which will come to you this afternoon, Nigel, as well. But really to bring those sort of experiences together. I mean, obviously we can talk about it from a specific tools or anything like that as well. But equally, from a point of view that we're all like business leaders, coming to the forum in some respects, we're often faced obviously with that challenge of keeping the training interesting, obviously, for the consumer. It's motivational and innovative. How would you say that perhaps a way that you could recommend to ensure that as an organization or in the training program that we keep it the innovation there as well? How do we look at the version 1 today? In 6 months we've got version 2 coming down the line. What innovative things are you thinking about in the training programs that would help address engagement and innovation? Marie-Louise, pass that one back to you.
I think we should all be critical at our own work once we design the training and look back on it. I would always suggest to test it with maybe 3 or 4 people from the target audience. So not show it to friends or colleagues, but really the target audience, and get that feedback and redo the work where it needs to be done. But always keep in mind also, the whole world now of ChatGPT, AI, avatars, social media, and not to say that you have to incorporate that in each training, but be aware of it and see how your target audience uses it or wants to learn more about it. So really engage with your learner up front to see whether their level of knowledge is maybe really high and they use ChatGPT every day, and your training is not up to bar at that. So be really critical also on your own work.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about ChatGPT, and the way I'm looking at that is to give me an opportunity to be more creative in my day-to-day role, as that much as anything else. John, similar sort of question to yourself. From how are you going to be maintaining your innovative curve, be in front of the competition?
I mean, I absolutely mirror what you said, Marie-Louise, and I think that the responsibility for that for any organization is in our hands to do it. You have to be plugged into what's coming out in the marketplace. You should be critical because there's more and more products coming out there, more and more things being discussed, and they're not necessarily all that practically applied. So you need to be demanding of that. But we've got to be attached to it. There's a lot of information out there. You have to work to get through it. But there's some good community groups in place, in LinkedIn in particular, that you can tap into, which will keep you connected, and absolutely talk about that with your clients. That'll open up the opportunities if you know what's available and you know what's being done, and you've got a client that's interested, or they are innovative, they might be entrepreneurial with their learning materials, so you could look at using that as test beds. AI is the obvious one to talk about. I spend so much time with clients talking about AI, but in reality, it's not that applicable to a lot of programs. We're doing a program with a social value organization where we have managed to get ChatGPT-4 working with open essay type questions on the LMS on a new spring. And ChatGPT, who has been prepared, so giving it a very distinct framework to operate and advise within, can then work as an advisor to the learner. So telling the learner, they submit answers to questions in open essay format, and ChatGPT is telling them what they've got right, what's a good answer, where they've maybe missed some content, comparing it to the content contained in the learning program to that point, and then helps direct them towards what they need to do. And that can then be objectively measured at the end of the program through assessment tools. So you're providing an extra mechanic in there for individual learners, so they can apply it the way they've learned it, and then they'll get feedback based on that. And I think stuff like that's really exciting. But in reality, that's the only real benefit we've seen from AI, because although it's talked about all the time, we're not seeing it in many programs. Gen AI is being talked about. It's interesting, that was in Donald Taylor's survey, because it's talked about all the time. Don't think it's got that much in regards to practical application for most organizations most of the time. There are probably occasions, certainly if you're big enough, there might be benefit. But unless you've got a huge resource of material, not sure most people are ready for that. So, that conversation with the client is quite important to understand what it is they actually want. And, if they're interested, like, how do you actually get something useful and valuable in for them? But to do that, you also need to have a good base knowledge to explore that with them. And the advantage is exploration. So you can tell them that, it's like, I'm really interested in that. Let's explore it together. And then go learn it. And you don't need to be a full expert, but you do need to at least know what's out there to then see how it would work for your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in essence, it's, for me, let's not go too far away from the fundamentals of they talk about, from a scaffolding approach to learning, that those methodologies are honed, they work, and these tools will help, should we aspect the innovation, tick that box, but really fundamentally, what works, let's keep with that, but let's build on that with the advances of technologies. Marie-Louise, I'm just conscious of the time. So if you had one word to describe something that people should take away with them, what one word would that be today?
Really get in touch with the learner.
Yeah, perfect. And John, I've given you 5 seconds extra to think about an answer. What would that be?
And I'm going to match and not do it in one word, but I think we need to be open-minded about what we do.
Yeah. So from my perspective, this was all about us having a very informal chat, as we talked about previously, drinking over a coffee in front of a fire to enjoy some conversations. And appreciate everyone that needs to jump off now because we've come up to our time. We will send a video of this today for colleagues who are unable to make it. They will get that as well. I would like to thank everybody for accepting my invitations to join us, the questions you put in the chat, but equally I must acknowledge the experts in the room. John, we've bumped into each other many a time. I do appreciate your experience, your knowledge that you shared today. Marie-Louise, yet again as well, making this an international event today for us. I do appreciate your time. I hope that we all work together in one context or another in the future, and that includes all the guests and invites that we've actually received over this time. So today we sign out with a fantastic smile on our face. I've achieved something, I've learned something. Thank you so much. much, and enjoy the remainder of the week, everybody.